Look at the cedar. Was it born a tree? Was it born strong and independent, no matter what it went through? Was it born upset at some times and disappointed at others? No. It was a seed. It was a seed, and it is a big tree now, because of what it went through before. I think I am just like a cedar.
Yet we don't have a book. They are not agreeing on its content. They are fighting over what should be written. They are arguing over what every one of them believe is true. They are not thinking about the importance of history.
Could someone document the past?
Look, Mummy, there's no plane up in the sky.
Could someone document the past in its images and its feelings, its surroundings, and how it felt like to be in the past?
Thinking about the future generations who need to understand their past in order to apprehend their present. They are not thinking about all the blood that filled our streets. Well, they are not thinking at all.
Did you hear the falling bombs? Did you ever wonder why we had to run for shelter when the promise of a brave new world unfurled beneath the clear blue sky?
It is very hard for us. They ruined the country, they got out of it, and they now expect us to fix it, all by ourselves. It is very hard.
My memory of the past was not a pleasant memory. I saw the war as a child. I was 10 years old. My mother went shopping. It was a matter of hours that the country was on fire. We escaped the war. In Kuwait, I was an expatriate. I was a foreigner in the land of the Arabs.
I was born botanical, the soul of an animal. Deep beneath the layers, I sink my roots. No need for mechanical, I come strictly organical. When I need the feast, I look to the east. That's why I'm never scared of the beast. Even though they try to play upon me, I'm protected by the one always greater than me. So now I reveal to thee, because you wanna see the contour of my mystery.
I just shot you, you're on camera. Is Hala here?
The strength of my arches, the color of my conscience, the way that I process my diction.
The big explosion, it is announced, started in 1975.
بدأ العد العكسي في لبنان لاندلاع الحرب، وأخذت الأطراف تعد العدة لخوض المعركة الآتية. وبينما كان الفلسطينيون قوة مسلحة، بدأ اليمين اللبناني بتدريب عناصره منذ عام 1970 على الأقل.
Back then, it was a battle of identity. I was not an Arab. My ancestors are the Phoenicians. Santa. But I was doomed to return to Phoenicia. In 1988, life was a thrill. 24 years later, it feels like another country, with a new people.
I'm protected by the one always greater than me. So now I reveal to thee, because you want to see the contour of my mystery, the strength of my arches, the color of my conscience, the way that I process my diction. Some fact, some fiction, some mystery and some future fantasy. I'm the trunk that holds the branches, the leaves that do the dances. My flowers romantic, my love gigantic. From Africa, transplanted transatlantic.
عم دخني؟
أكيد عم دخني.
You're on camera.
هو قدام الكاميرا.
Yes, دخني. ولا يا. Exactly. ماشي الحال. Break the law. This is Lebanon. In the holy book, my ancestors would be the Israelites, the Ishmaelites, Syriac, and Aramaic. My father was from Galilee. My mother's roots go back to the Arab conquest. Al-Husayni. It was them that brought Islam to Phoenicia.
I keep on living with the fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun on the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun on the skin on the drum. I keep on living.
This was the history of the Holy Land and the nations of the states of the Holy Land. A history that was to be constructed around the institution of the victor, the League of Nations.
The Great War was over. On the 11th of November 1918, an armistice had been signed. In Britain and France, the survivors celebrated victory, the return of peace and the end of bloodshed. They'd left behind the nightmare lands of death and destruction created by 4 years of war. The cost of those years was almost beyond imagination, but somehow, somewhere, that cost would have to be counted. And the defeated would have to pay the price of peace.
The Treaty of Versailles was one of the most important events of the 20th century, and it had far-reaching consequences. It was largely responsible for the major events which occurred in the rest of the century, including the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party, World War II, and much of the Cold War which occurred afterwards. The treaty was the result of the First World War. This war was unlike any other because it involved most of the countries of the world. The destruction caused by the war was unheard of in its size, economic impact, and the number of casualties. It was the first war that featured advanced technology, such as submarines, aircraft, radio communication, and poison gas. Manufacturing advances also allowed a great production of weaponry, including new items such as tanks and machine guns. All this resulted in a total of 8,241,000 combat deaths. Not to mention, there were 25 million people who died from the Spanish flu immediately after the war. After the United States entered the war on the side of the Allies, the tide was turned against Germany. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson came up with his 14-point plan of how to end the war in a fair way and to ensure a lasting peace afterwards. The German government was willing to end the war and accept a treaty, trusting that it would be on the basis of Wilson's 14-point plan. The war ended, the German military was dismantled, and the 4 main Allied leaders met at Versailles to determine the final terms of the treaty.
"1919 was the year of the birth of history. It was the year Phoenicia was revived. Hiram, king of Tyre, ordered that the cedars of Lebanon be cut to build the temple. The temple stood at the weeping valley of the Bekaa, where the God of Zion appeared to King David. The Phoenicians were going to rise."
But of all the statesmen who came to Paris to settle the peace, the most important were President Wilson of the United States, Georges Clemenceau, the French Premier, and Lloyd George, Prime Minister of Britain. Each had very different ideas of what to do about the central problem of Germany. Woodrow Wilson appeared to promise a just and lasting peace, not punishment. Europe acclaimed him as the great and good man from the New World. This was because his 14 points seemed to promise a new moral order in international affairs. No more secret diplomacy, reduction in armaments, and a League of Nations to protect all countries from aggression.
The League of Nations started the process of the modern European nation-state building. The doctrine justifying the creation of nation-states based on the selection of a natural community was national self-determination. The nation of the League of Nations must have a history and a historical state. The first historical state that was to come to life was Syria. Wilson arranged for the King Crane Commission to survey the wishes of the communities in Syria that previously belonged to the Ottoman Empire. The representation of the population based on confession were Christian, Muslim, Jews, Druze, and others. The majority, including the Jews, rejected the partition of Syria into Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. Nevertheless, Syria was divided, its intellectuals executed.
I keep on living with the fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I'm fully marinated, and now I'm ready for the fire. So you can fire one, fire two. See, I've been fully marinated, and now I'm ready for the fire. So you can fire one, fire two. Fire one, fire two. Fire one, fire two. Fire one.
أنطون سعاده الذي أعدم في 8 من تموز عام 1949 بمؤامرة من بين مصر الملك فاروق وإسرائيل ولبنان بشار الخوري وسوريا حسن الزعيم والأردن الملك عبد الله بن حسين.
محاكمتي سياسية بحتة، فلي مبدأ سياسي واضح أحيا وأموت لأجله. لم يذكر التاريخ تدبيرا معوجا أو مؤامرة كالمؤامرة التي دبرت ضدي وضد حزبي. حزبي لم يتآمر على الحكومة كما تزعمون ولا هاجمها، لكنهم هاجمونا فدافعنا عن أنفسنا. كم كنت أتمنى أن أقتل برصاصة على الطريق وأن لا تسجل على لبنان صدمة العار هذه في محاكمتي بهذا الشكل. حضرة الرئيس، محاكمتي اغتيال سياسي.
But hey, no. 1975 was not when the explosion started. This is when the explosion reached Lebanon. The explosion started in 1919. It started in Europe, and precisely in Germany.
Surprisingly, it was Lloyd George who fought most strongly for German interests at Versailles. Behind him was a public elated by victory, but eager for revenge. The Prime Minister appeared to share that opinion, but really had no time for those who wanted to destroy Germany. What mattered to him was that Germany should be made stable and allowed to recover her strength as a trading partner.
Britain had already promised the Zionist organization a state in the Balfour Declaration. The Germans and the British agreed. Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916 defined the territorial demarcation of states. 1919 saw the institutional beginning of the birth of the Jewish nation. The construction of the German and the Jews as two nations in a biological relation of force required a discourse in history. It also required an apparatus of knowledge production constructing the identity of the nation.
Nuremberg laws were established. These laws classified people with 4 German grandparents as German or kindred blood, while people were classified as Jews if they descended from 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents. A person with 1 or 2 Jewish grandparents was a Mischling, a crossbreed with mixed blood. These laws deprived Jews of German citizenship and prohibited marriage between Jews and other Germans. During this time, Eva Kohler, a Holocaust survivor, remembers the discrimination she felt as a child.
The Nazis did everything they could to make people hate the Jews. Our math was taught to us in books that had questions like, If there were 5 Jews, and you kill 3, then how many are left?
Racism can only function when the nation is sovereign, and with this sovereignty, it is endowed with the right to kill and make life.
Of the one like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. Fully marinated. And now
this man that has become the legend for the struggle for human dignity. Nelson Mandela's identity as an African must have played a significant role in his struggle. Nevertheless, Mandela was not seeking an individualist or self-centered journey of success. He saw some elements of his identity that may also be abstracted to include the community as a whole, and that is where we are going to think of ourselves and of our identity as something that is related to the community as a whole. I want to hear from all of you, who are you? Who do you think you are? What influenced your identity? In all senses that you may think of who you are. And I will start with me. I am Abir Shaban. As a child, I thought that this was my identity. Little did I know. I was born in Kuwait to a Lebanese father. My dad took us to Lebanon during summer. I can still remember the remarks I used to get for not speaking proper Lebanese. Early on, I learned that I was a stranger to my ancestral community.
Like the beat on the one, I'm the skin on the drum, on the drum, on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum.
Go!
Aida Bayham is who I am. And who is that supposed to be? I was born in Canada, lived in Lebanon and Saudi Arabia. It has made me who I am, raised in 2 different countries, which made me aware of the difference of cultures. I have 3 homes, one in Lebanon, one in Saudi Arabia, and the other one in the airplane.
Excellent, Aida. I really like this. You've done a great job. Now we will move to Hirad.
My name is Hirad Abedanian, a 3rd generation genocide survivor. I'm a Lebanese of Armenian origin. My people had a significant influence on my identity. As a people subjected to genocide and survived it, my past defines my present and directs my future. That moment in history has been internalized in my identity. I tend to push myself to work harder and prove otherwise to the sides that try to eliminate an entire race. This may be a bit too extreme, but we were politicized by the day we were born, by the name we were given. The yarn at the end of my family name already breeds stereotypes and prejudices.
On the other reindeer used to laugh and call him names. They never had forward all, joining any reindeer game. Then one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, Rudolph, with your nose so bright, won't you guide my sleigh tonight?
I wonder what the confession of the Phoenicians was. They built the temple of god Baal of the Bekaa Valley, over which the Romans built their temple of the sun. They indulged in the luxuries of life, then they were destroyed, but the Phoenicians were forgiven. God made of them the myth of the phoenix, because they were a good people. The Phoenicians were a heterogeneous people, a people that celebrated their difference.
The pieces of the puzzle. See me, reflections in the puddle. After the storm, the purple of the sky brings to mind another time we resided below the waterline. Life is fine there, human, divine.
ولاد صغار بعد الخلقانين طازة بالمستشفى قاعدين بالأوضة هذه اللي بيقعدوا يحطوا فيها ولاد الصغار. ولد عمله للثاني بالليل قال دخلك تصبي ولا بنت؟ قال له لحظة ما بعرف، لحظة لشوف. كشف الغطا عن حاله ومطلع هيك بحاله. قال له لا أنا بنت. قال له كيف عرفت؟ قال له لابس كفان أزرق.
But in the years following, evil men came, swallowing. Everything in sight. Some learned to run, some stayed to fight. I kneeled to the tomb of the soldier, said I would love to behold her. The magic in store there. She touched me on the shoulder. She said, in time, all is revealed. Box of light, be unsealed. Now listen to me, son. Be like the skin on the drum.
The Phoenicians were defeated. They watched in silence as the confessional nation was violently occupying and institutionalizing the nation-states in the Holy Land.
4th Armored Division of General Patton's 3rd Army liberated this camp early. Under the guise of an insane asylum, this has been the headquarters for the systematic murder of 35,000 Poles, Russians, and Germans sent here mainly for political and religious considerations. Those still alive were examined by Major Herman Volker of the American War Crimes Investigation Team. The townspeople in Hadamar, Germany, called this place the House of Shudders. More than 200 political prisoners were burned to death at this concentration camp near Leipzig. Others, among the original total of 350 inmates, were shot down by German elite guards as they dashed from the prison huts to celebrate the arrival of American troops outside the city. The atrocity story is told by the few who managed to survive. They relate how
Claims for territorial states following World War I started the process of the European nation-state building, creating massive waves of refugees.
Homeward bound at last, nearly 2,000 Yugoslavs and Greeks too prepare to leave their Middle East refuge. Here at El Shat in the Sinai Desert, UNRWA organized a vast refugee camp where eventually over 20,000 stricken people were to find sanctuary. Here they stayed for 18 months, living for the day when once more they could return home. That day had come.
1943 is when history stopped in Phoenicia. Now, Phoenicia is called Lebanon, a national sovereign state governed by the sectarian and non-constitutional National Pact of 1943. In 1932, the one and only census in the history of the state defined the confessional majority that would become sovereign. The 1945 peace was not our peace.
للأزمة بخلاف الموضوع الفلسطيني، فقد بات اليسار اللبناني يطرح بقوة قضية إصلاح النظام السياسي في البلاد، وكان على رأس هذه المطالب إلغاء الطائفية السياسية والمناصفة في مقاعد مجلس النواب التي كانت موزعة بنسبة 6 مقاعد للمسيحيين مقابل 5 للمسلمين.
In 1949, our identity was in question. As the Judeans started to arrive to what Herodotus called Palestine Syria, a new discourse in history emerged. This is the history of the biblical sovereign and Jewish nation. Sovereignty separated the tribe of Judah from the 12 tribes of Israel. It fragmented and segmented the Israelites into superiors and inferiors. This is core to the conflict in terms of history. But in fact, the problem was not about history. The effect of Nazi Germany did not end with the peace of 1945. The Holocaust started a process of ethnic cleansing that was directed to the East, a process associated with the placement of the Jews in mandated Palestine and the displacement of the Palestinians into neighboring states. The war broke between Lebanon, Syria, and the Judeans, arriving from Europe. 750,000 Palestinians were made refugees. The Security Council of the United Nations resolved to end the war. The problem then becomes rooted in the application of Security Council Resolution 73. Resolution 73 of the 11th of August 1949 demanded that the Jewish state fulfill the General Assembly Resolution 194, asking the Palestinians to return to their homes in the Galilee as a condition for peace.
نحن شعب عنده 6000 سنة حضارة وراه. نحن ما بقى نسمح انه رمل وصحراء وحكيم وجهل يتطاولوا على 6000 سنة حضارة.
نحن كقوات لبنانية قررنا وقرارنا نهائي انه منعيش هون كمسيحيين راسنا مرفوع حقار. نفسينا الآمن المسحوق دعساتك نحن مشينا دعساتك مرسومة بروح لكن العب نفسينا الآمن المسحوق دعساتك نحن مشينا دعساتك مرسومة بروح صدف الحمراء لعبت فينا عمالونا سنوب سنوب سكتنا والريح بتلوينا مرة شمال ومرة جنوب كنا عم جرح ومبكينا بنتذكر نقول من هيك الملعب.
This is the story of Israel's invasion of Lebanon, of an attempt to obliterate a dangerous enemy, of the bloody conquest of Beirut, of the innocent civilians caught tragically in the middle, and of the horrible price paid when Israel changed from David to Goliath.
إذا كنتوا موجودين هون لتشكلوا النواة لهالوحدات الدفاعية عن حضارة لتشكلوا نواة محافظة على استقلال حقيقي للبنان، على سيادة حقيقية للبنان، على كرامة حقيقية للبنان. عم نتنظم، عم نتحضر، لا لنعمل حزب ولا لنعمل انتخابات مختار ونطور ولا لنعمل وزراء ونواب. على سريتكم كل هالاعتبارات عم نتدرب لنحافظ على لبنان، وكل واحد منا بده يحافظ مثل ما هو بيعرف قد ما هو بيقدر، لانه نحن بنعرف لوقت يلي بعد مرة تانية حدا بده يفكر يتطاول على لبنان نفرجيه انه التطاول على لبنان منه سهل ومنه بسيط، وانه هالتطاول هيدا على لبنان وقت اللي حدا بده يقوم فيه بده يدفع ثمنه كثير غالي.
In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon. But the Phoenicians were not going to become refugees. They were defending the Holy Land against the invasion coming from Europe. We shall protect our temple as we weep along the weeping valley of the Bekaa.
حينما هب الجنوب لكي يقاوم، إن تاريخ الإباء غير دائم يكتب عن أرضنا أرض الملاعب. هاب ما اشتكى مما ذل والهزائم، حينما هب الجنوب لكي يقاوم، إن تاريخ الإباء غير دائم يكتب عن أرضنا أرض الملاعب.
Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story. Israel versus the PLO, the invasion of Lebanon.
I got some bad news for you, sunshine. Nick isn't well, he's back at the hotel. And they sent us along as a surrogate man. Now tonight, we're gonna find out when you got.
Good evening from Versailles. The ornate palace outside Paris, where the end of the seven-nation economic summit today was completely overshadowed by an Israeli invasion of Lebanon. Israeli tanks and troops, backed by air and sea bombardment, crossed into Lebanon before dawn. The aim to destroy Palestinian guerrilla bases. And although hope was being expressed...
Are there any queers in the audience tonight? Get them up against the wall! Yes! No! There's one in the spotlight, he don't look right! I'm him up against the wall! Yes! No! And no one looks Jewish! And that was the coup! They had to let all this rich lamb into the room! This was smoking inside! And that was got
بيانات صوتية، لا حوارات صحفية، صورتان فقط هي كل النتائج التي قد يصل إليها الباحث عن عماد مغنية.
Since every action generates an action, opposite in direction and equal in force, force will generate a counterforce of resistance. This force in resistance could only be studied when action upon action is analyzed at the point when a powerful encounter redirects power in the opposite direction.
عماد مغنية يعتبره حزب الله اللبناني أحد كبار قادته العسكريين في مقاومة الاحتلال الإسرائيلي، بينما ترى فيه واشنطن ودول غربية أخرى إرهابيا مطلوبا للعدالة. رغم ذلك تكاد لا تجد سوى صورة واحدة لهذا الشخص الذي وضعته الولايات المتحدة وعشرات الدول الغربية الأخرى على رأس قائمة المطلوبين عالميا لاتهامه بما تصفه عمليات إرهابية. في سور جنوب لبنان ولد مغني عام 62 ليلتحق مبكرا بحركة فتح ومن ثم بحركة أمل، لينخرط فيما بعد في حزب الله وقيادة المقاومة الإسلامية إثر الاجتياح الإسرائيلي للبنان. ارتبط اسم عماد مغني بالعديد من الهجمات على مصالح غربية في لبنان خلال فترة الثمانينات، فالولايات المتحدة تتهمه بأنه العقل المدبر لتفجير سفارتها في بيروت في أبريل نيسان من عام 83 ومقتل أكثر من 60 شخصا في هذا التفجير، كما تحمله مسؤولية التخطيط لتفجير مقر قوات المارينز في العام ذاته، حيث قتل قرابة 250 من جنود المارينز المرابطين في العاصمة اللبنانية آنذاك. وتضم قائمة الاتهامات أيضا تفجير معسكر القوات الفرنسية في البقاع اللبناني. في عام 85 خطفت طائرة TWA الأمريكية إلى بيروت وقتل أحد ضباط البحرية الأمريكية في هذا الحادث. وجهت أصابع الاتهام أيضا إلى عماد مغني الذي حمل كذلك المسؤولية عن خطف واحتجاز العديد من الرهائن الأمريكيين في لبنان خلال ثمانينيات القرن الماضي.
الجنوب لكي يقاوم إن تاريخ الإباء غير نائم يكتب عن أرضنا أرض الملاحم. هذا ما اشتكى بالمذل والهزائم حينما هب الجنوب لكي يقاوم إن تاريخ الإباء غير نائم يكتب عن أرضنا أرض الملاحم. إني أهل العزم إن تدعى العزائم هذا سيفي بالوغى بالموت قائم. إن شعبي كله وطن مقاوم مرتضى غير المعزة والمكارم. إني أهل العزم إن تدعى العزائم هذا سيفي بالوغى بالموت قائم. إن شعبي كله وطن مقاوم مرتضى غير المعزة والمكارم. حينما هب الجنوب لكي يقاوم إن تاريخ الإباء غير نائم يكتب عن أرضنا أرض الملاحم. ما ركنا للمدى التي لم نساوم وانتصرنا رغم عدوان المهاجم. وليرى الأحرار يا كل العواصم كيف يبدو المجد في الأوطان دائم. ما ركنا للمدى التي لم نساوم وانتصرنا رغم عدوان المهاجم. فليرى الأحرار يا كل العواصم كيف يبدو المجد في الأوطان دائم.
In 1989, the city was in rubble.
إنما هب الجنوب لكي يقاوم
In 1989, the city was in rubble.
I am young, yes. I've only been here since I was born, and this equals 18 years. I didn't live the Lebanese war, neither the one with Israel. I've heard stories, I've watched movies, I heard songs, I saw pictures, and I read articles. But I was never...
Exorcism is the practice of evicting demons from a possessed person. My Lebanonism felt like a demon that had possessed me. Exorcism was the process to liberate me. I had to be free. Liberation meant that I was naked, as I am transformed into a human, a person without ancestors, like Eve. As a human being, I was naked. My nakedness did not make me feel vulnerable. It made me feel free.
I keep on living with the fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I'm fully marinated, and now I'm ready for the fire.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
How have you been?
2014.
Are you fine to be in a movie? Hello everybody. In a documentary. Is Uri here today?
Painting one.
Oh, I need to print.
It's
because you missed it.
بس you missed it. I didn't know you missed it. I was in Ninja.
It's 5% of the final grade of the final.
She missed it, Karina.
What did you say? No, she didn't miss it, but she did the best. Yeah, what did you have? Okay, so what we are going to do today is that we will be entering the world in 2:30 by way of imagination. Okay? So the first thing I want you to do is to choose a personal memory. So I want you to think of a personal memory. And then I want you to remember this memory. I want you to remember how it felt like. I want you to remember who were the people involved. What were the colors like? What was the weather like? How did it smell like? I want you to have a description of the memory. So spend 2 minutes thinking about it. Okay, now I want you to move to the future. We want to imagine the future in 2030. 30. I want you to focus on peace. And I want you to focus on peace for a little while. And I want you then to tell me what would peace look like. Okay. So I want you then to think about peace and write down a goal statement that expresses your personal hopes for a peaceful future. Write only 2 or 3 sentences. So now, I want you to remember the future. And while you are remembering this future, like you have remembered the past, and you have to think of the future in the sense that as if you are a reporter walking into the future, and then write a descriptive few paragraphs explaining how did the future look like? Describe it for me.
A peaceful future.
A peaceful future. What were children doing in the future? What was the government doing in the future? What were the people doing in the future? How did people interact with each other in the future? How did the buildings look like, the traffic, all these things. And we said that the future was peaceful. So I want you to give me a description of this peaceful future. What was everybody doing in this future of peace? Mia is going to read for us her description of remembering the future. Isn't that what you're doing? Okay, so tell us how the future looked like when you walked into it. Go ahead.
We went out without worrying about getting beaten, stolen, raped, offended, or killed. We did more than just breathe. We actually started living. We left our doors unlocked and our windows open. We loved one another without judging. Art was a great way to express ourselves. There were no guns, no bombs, and no drugs.
I escaped and let the future take responsibility. I did not belong in the history of Lebanon. Lebanon was taken over by foreigners. They were constructing histories so that they could construct the other, the one they must kill. I was not a part of history. I admitted defeat. I escaped my responsibility of the present of Phoenicia.
I was born botanical, the soul of an animal. Deep beneath the layers, I sink my roots. No need for mechanical, I come strictly organical. When I need to feast, I look to the east. That's why I'm never scared of the beast. Even though they try to prey upon me, I'm protected by the one always greater than me. So now I reveal to thee, because you want to see the contour of my mystery, the strength of my arches, the color of my conscience, the way that I process my diction. Some fact, some fiction, some mystery and some future fantasy. I'm the trunk that holds the branches, the leaves that do the dances. My flowers romantic, my love gigantic. From Africa, transplanted transatlantic. In the heat of the sun, I bring shade for everyone. Like the beat on the one, I'm the skin on the drum, I keep on living with the fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness of the one, like the heat of the sun or the skin on the drum. I keep on living with the fullness